When, after 5 years of city life, I finally decided to visit my parents, I hoped for a warm reception. Their house stood on the edge of a dense forest, far from civilization. The evening road was long, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something strange awaited me. Perhaps it was just fatigue. The creaking floorboards on the veranda greeted me with the same gloomy welcome as in my childhood. My parents looked older than I expected. My mother, despite her usual cheerfulness, now moved slowly, and my father almost never met my gaze. Nevertheless, their warmth seemed genuine. We dined in the living room, lit only by a kerosene lamp. Electricity here, he turned out, had long been out. My father waved off my questions about why. "It doesn't matter," he said, avoiding details. At first, everything went smoothly, as much as it could after such a long separation. We spoke about the past, barely touching on the present. My parents hardly asked anything about my life in the city, which struck me as odd. Their conversations revolved around the forest, the house, and vague mentions of things better left alone. On the third day, I woke up to a strange smell, like rotting moss mixed with dampness. Stepping out of my room, I found my parents sitting on the living room floor, their heads bowed low, as if performing some strange ritual. Their lips murmured words I couldn't make out, and their hands methodically moved across the floor, as though trying to feel for something. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to hide my growing unease. They turned sharply, their faces looking tired, with dark shadows under their eyes. It's just necessary, my mother replied without looking up. "Don't worry." Later, while walking around the property, I noticed strange symbols carved into the ground surrounding the house. They formed circles, branching out like strands of a web, disappearing into the dense forest. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were ancient, almost otherworldly. That same night I heard strange noises outside my window, rustling, scraping, as if something large and soft was clawing at the walls. I wanted to look out, but the window in my room was covered with a sticky film that I couldn't wipe off. I tried the living room window, but it was the same there. My parents didn't even react when I told them about it, as if they hadn't heard me at all. By morning, they were barely speaking. My father only said once, "You shouldn't have come now." He said it and immediately turned away, as if afraid to continue. The longer I stayed in the house, the more I felt it was alive in its own way. At night, I heard something moving beneath the floorboards, faintly but unnaturally. On the fourth day, I decided to figure out what was going on. Behind the door to the far room, where my parents often disappeared for long periods, I heard muffled sounds. I called out to them, but there was no answer. When I entered, I saw that the walls of the room were covered with the same symbols as those around the house. My parents stood in a corner, their faces distorted by some unexplainable grimace. Their eyes, empty, black, like two bottomless pits. "You opened it?" my mother whispered in a voice that was both hers and someone else's. Suddenly, the floor beneath me cracked, as if something was moving under the house. My father stepped forward, and I saw his body begin to change. His skin turned gray like it was covered in mold, and his arms stretched out, transforming into long, writhing appendages. I broke free of the house, flying out into the yard without even realizing I was barefoot as I dashed into the forest. My head was ringing, and behind me came a whisper that seemed to come not only from my parents, but also from the forest itself. On the fifth day, wandering among the trees, I realized that the forest surrounding the house was changing. The trees seemed to bend toward me, their roots crawling out of the ground, and mist enveloped everything. I felt trapped, with no way out. When I finally gathered the courage to return to the house, its appearance froze me in place. The house seemed shrunken, covered in that same sticky slime I had seen before. The doors were wide open, and from inside came a hum that couldn't be heard, only felt. I went inside. In the living room, among the remnants of furniture and torn wallpaper, lay an old book. The pages were covered in symbols that made my nose bleed just from looking at them. But the worst was on the last pages. There I saw a drawing depicting figures that resembled my parents but had completely lost their human appearance. And then I heard a whisper behind me, "You should have stayed in the city." It was my mother's voice. I turned, but instead of her stood something that defied human language. I don't remember how I ran from there. My memory has erased everything except the sound of scraping and their stares. Now I'm writing this from a hotel room 100 miles away from that place. At night, I hear the darkness calling me back. Sometimes I think I see shadows moving in the corner. Or that my parents are watching me through the windows. I don't know who or what they became, but I feel like part of that darkness is already inside me. And one day, I too will stop being myself.